Imagine standing on the shore of the Mediterranean, feeling the salty breeze and watching the sun set beyond the horizon. Now, picture a time long before Rome's first emperor ever dreamed of conquest. Back then, another empire ruled these waters, a city born from the fires of ambition, shaped by trade, and destined to become a legend. This city was Carthage, the phoenix of the ancient world, rising from the North African coast to challenge the mightiest powers of its age. The story of Carthage begins not with armies, but with traders. The founders of Carthage were Phoenician merchants, skilled navigators who sailed from the distant city of Tyre, seeking new opportunities across the sea. According to one of the most cherished legends, their leader was Queen Elissa, or as the Romans later called her, Dido. Forced to flee her homeland, Dido arrived on the African shore with nothing but her followers and a bold idea. When a local king agreed to give her as much land as she could cover with a single ox hide, she took the hide, sliced it into thin strips, and cleverly encircled a whole hill. On this hill, Carthage was born. But how did this small colony of traders become the greatest superpower of its day? The secret lay in their skill on the sea. The people of Carthage became masters of shipbuilding and navigation. Some historians believe they sailed as far as the Atlantic coast, searching for tin in what is now Britain, and may have even circumnavigated Africa thousands of years before European explorers. Their ships filled the harbors of the Mediterranean, carrying precious metals, fine cloth, and exotic spices. Carthage was not just a city, it was a gateway between continents, a meeting point for cultures and ideas. Yet, with great power comes great rivalry. As Carthage's influence grew, so did the concerns of another rising city, Rome. The Romans looked across the sea and saw not just a competitor, but a threat. Why did Rome fear Carthage so much? Perhaps it was the memory of Carthage's legendary navy, which seemed to appear and disappear like shadows on the waves. Or maybe it was the wealth pouring into Carthaginian markets from every corner of the known world. For centuries, these two cities eyed each other across the Mediterranean, like chess players waiting for the first move. Their rivalry would eventually erupt into a series of epic conflicts known as the Punic Wars, changing the fate of the ancient world forever. But before we get to those battles, let's pause and think about what made Carthage so unique. This was a city where cultures mixed, where traders from Greece, Egypt, Africa, and beyond met in bustling markets. People spoke many languages, shared new ideas, and created a city that was as cosmopolitan as any modern metropolis. And here's a fascinating curiosity. Carthaginian sailors used a special purple dye made from tiny sea snails to color their robes. This dye was so rare and expensive that only the wealthiest citizens could afford it. It became a symbol of status, and centuries later, Roman emperors would adopt the color as their own. So, as we begin our journey into the world of Carthage, remember that this is more than just a tale of battles and empires. It is the story of human ambition, of dreams launched across the sea, and of a city that dared to stand against the greatest power the world had ever seen. If you love stories like this, make sure to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to Legacy of Empires. Together, let's uncover the lost legacy of Carthage, the Mediterranean's forgotten giant. Picture this. It's the year 814 before Christ, and the Mediterranean is still a wild, untamed sea where pirates and traders clash under burning skies. In this dangerous world, a remarkable woman is about to change history forever. Her name was Elissa, though the Romans would later call her Dido. She was a Phoenician princess fleeing from Tyre, carrying nothing but her wit, her courage, and a handful of loyal followers. When she arrived on the North African coast, she faced a problem that would have defeated most people. How do you build a city when you have no land? The local Berber king, Iarbas, was willing to make a deal, but it seemed almost like a joke. He told Elissa she could have as much territory as a single ox hide could cover. Most people would have seen this as an insult, but Elissa saw opportunity where others saw impossibility. What happened next was pure genius. Instead of laying the ox hide flat on the ground, Alyssa took a knife and began cutting. She sliced that hide into the thinnest possible strips, so fine they were almost like thread. Then, piece by piece, she laid those strips end to end, creating a boundary line that stretched far beyond what anyone had imagined possible. When she was finished, she had encircled an entire hill overlooking the Mediterranean. That hill became Byrsa, the heart of what would grow into Carthage, one of the most powerful cities the ancient world had ever seen. The name itself comes from the Phoenician words Carthage, meaning new city. But this was no ordinary settlement. From the very moment of its founding, Carthage was destined for greatness. But here's what makes this story even more fascinating. Alyssa wasn't just clever, she was visionary. She chose that particular spot for reasons that went far beyond the oxhide trick. The location was perfect for what the Phoenicians did best: sailing, trading, and connecting distant worlds. The Phoenicians were unlike any other ancient people. While other civilizations were focused on conquering land and building massive temples, the Phoenicians were masters of the sea. They had been sailing the Mediterranean for centuries before Carthage was even a dream, and they possessed knowledge that seems almost magical to us today. These incredible navigators didn't just hug coastlines like other ancient sailors. They ventured into the open ocean with a confidence that wouldn't be matched for thousands of years. Some historians believe Phoenician ships reached Britain, sailing through dangerous Atlantic waters to trade for precious tin. Even more remarkably, there's evidence suggesting they may have circumnavigated the entire continent of Africa, achieving in ancient times what European explorers wouldn't accomplish until the 15th and 16th centuries. Think about that for a moment. While most of the world still believed the Earth was flat, Phoenician sailors were already proving its roundness through their incredible voyages. They developed advanced shipbuilding techniques, creating vessels that could handle both river navigation and open-sea storms. Their ships were faster, more durable, and more sophisticated than anything their competitors could build. But perhaps most importantly, the Phoenicians understood something that would make Carthage incredibly wealthy: the power of information. In an age without telephones, internet, or even reliable postal systems, whoever controlled trade routes also controlled the flow of knowledge, goods, and cultural exchange. When Alyssa founded Carthage, she wasn't just creating another Phoenician colony. She was establishing what would become the hub of a vast commercial network that stretched from Spain to the Black Sea. Carthage would grow to control not just trade routes, but entire islands, coastlines, and the countless smaller settlements that depended on Mediterranean commerce. The genius of Carthage's location became clear within just a few generations. The city sat perfectly positioned to control the narrow passage between the eastern and western Mediterranean. Every merchant ship, every cargo vessel loaded with precious goods had to pass within sight of Carthage's growing harbors. And those harbors. As Carthage grew, its people built something that left visitors speechless: a double harbor system unlike anything the world had ever seen. The outer harbor welcomed merchant vessels from across the known world, while the inner harbor housed Carthage's military fleet, hidden from enemy eyes behind a circular wall that concealed the true strength of Carthaginian naval power. From Alyssa's clever oxhide trick grew a city that would challenge the might of Rome itself, control vast territories across 3 continents, and create wealth that seemed almost unlimited. The little settlement that began with a refugee princess and her followers would become the beating heart of a maritime empire that ruled the waves for centuries. This is how legends are born, not from grand proclamations or massive armies, but from one woman's refusal to accept limitations, her ability to see possibilities where others saw problems, and her understanding that sometimes the most powerful empires begin with the simplest, most creative solutions. By the year 500 before Christ, something extraordinary had happened. The small settlement that began with Queen Alyssa's clever oxhide trick had transformed into something the ancient world had never seen before: a true maritime superpower. Carthage wasn't just another trading city anymore. It had become the undisputed master of the Mediterranean Sea. Imagine standing on the harbor walls of Carthage during this golden age. The sight would have taken your breath away. Hundreds of ships filled the waters as far as the eye could see. Massive merchant vessels arrived daily, their holds bursting with treasures from every corner of the known world. Silver from Spain gleamed in the sunlight, while precious purple dye from Phoenician workshops stained the docks. Ivory from Africa, tin from distant Britain, and exotic spices from lands so far away that most people thought they were mythical. But here's what made Carthage truly special. They didn't just participate in trade, they controlled it completely. Think of the Mediterranean as a vast highway system, and Carthage had built the toll booths at every major intersection. No merchant could sail from east to west or north to south without somehow contributing to Carthaginian wealth. The Carthaginians had perfected something that other civilizations were still struggling to understand: the art of naval warfare. Their ships weren't just bigger or faster than their competitors, they were smarter. Carthaginian naval architects had developed revolutionary designs that combined speed with incredible durability. Their warships could ram enemy vessels with devastating force, while their own hulls remained intact. What's even more impressive is how they organized their fleets. While other ancient navies were basically floating armies, Carthaginian naval forces operated with the precision of a well-oiled machine. They had developed complex signaling systems, advanced navigation techniques, and battle formations that could adapt to any situation. Their admirals studied wind patterns, ocean currents, and seasonal weather with the dedication of modern scientists. The wealth that flowed into Carthage during these centuries was almost beyond imagination. Archaeological evidence shows us that ordinary Carthaginian families owned luxury items that would have been reserved for royalty in other cities. Gold jewelry, fine ceramics, and exotic foods were commonplace. The city's architects built magnificent temples, elaborate public baths, and residential districts that rivaled anything in Greece or the growing Roman Republic. But perhaps the most remarkable thing about Carthaginian dominance was how they maintained it. Unlike empires that relied purely on military conquest, Carthage built a network of relationships, partnerships, and mutual dependencies that stretched across the entire Mediterranean world. They established colonies not as conquered territories, but as cooperative ventures that benefited everyone involved. Take Sicily, for example. This strategic island became a Carthaginian stronghold, not through brutal invasion, but through careful negotiation and mutual benefit. Carthaginian merchants brought prosperity to Sicilian ports, while Sicilian resources strengthened Carthaginian trade networks. The same pattern repeated across Sardinia, Corsica, and dozens of smaller islands and coastal settlements. The Carthaginians also revolutionized the concept of international commerce. They developed sophisticated banking systems, standardized weights and measures, and even created what might be considered the world's first international currency. A Carthaginian silver coin was accepted from Spain to Cyprus, making trade faster, more reliable, and more profitable for everyone involved. During this period, Carthage also became a center of learning and innovation. The city attracted scholars, artists, and inventors from across the ancient world. Carthaginian libraries contained knowledge from Egyptian, Greek, Babylonian, and countless other traditions. Their schools of navigation were considered the finest anywhere, and young nobles from other civilizations came to Carthage to learn the secrets of seamanship and commerce. However, beneath this golden age of prosperity and power lay something that has puzzled and disturbed historians for centuries. In the heart of Carthage stood a sacred area called the Tophet, a burial ground unlike any other in the ancient world. Here, archaeologists have discovered thousands of urns containing the cremated remains of very young children, sometimes infants. The meaning of these discoveries has sparked intense debate among scholars. Some ancient sources, particularly Roman writers who were enemies of Carthage, claimed that Carthaginians practiced child sacrifice during times of extreme crisis. According to these accounts, wealthy Carthaginian families would offer their youngest children to the gods Moloch and Tanit when the city faced terrible dangers like plague, famine, or military defeat. However, modern archaeologists and historians approach this topic with great caution. Many believe that the Tophet was simply a specialized cemetery for children who died from natural causes, particularly during the high infant mortality rates common in ancient times. The cremation and burial practices found there might have been religious rituals honoring deceased children, not evidence of sacrifice. What we do know is that the Tophet represents something deeply important about Carthaginian religious and social life. The care taken in these burials, the expensive urns used, and the prominent location of the cemetery all suggest that children held a special place in Carthaginian society. Whether through natural death or religious practice, these young lives were honored in ways that reflected the wealth and spiritual beliefs of their families. This mysterious aspect of Carthaginian culture reminds us that even the most successful civilizations carried complexities and contradictions that we may never fully understand. The same people who created unprecedented prosperity and maritime mastery also maintained religious traditions that seem foreign and troubling to modern sensibilities. Yet this is precisely what makes the story of Carthage so fascinating. Here was a civilization that achieved something remarkable. They proved that power didn't have to come from the sword alone. Through intelligence, innovation, and an almost magical understanding of the sea, they created an empire that lasted for centuries and influenced the entire course of Mediterranean history. As we'll see, this golden age of Carthaginian dominance was setting the stage for an epic confrontation that would shake the ancient world to its foundations. Because while Carthage ruled the waves, another power was rising in Italy, and their ambitions would soon collide in ways that neither civilization could have imagined. Are you fascinated by this ancient legacy? Then comment your thoughts, like the video, share it with fellow history lovers, and subscribe to Legacy of Empires for more epic journeys. Picture the Mediterranean in the year 264 before Christ. For centuries, Carthage had reigned supreme over these waters, their purple-sailed ships carrying wealth and power to every corner of the ancient world. But across the sea, something was stirring. In the hills of central Italy, a city called Rome had been quietly growing, expanding, and dreaming of greatness. At first, these two civilizations seemed destined to coexist peacefully. Rome was a land-based power, focused on conquering Italian tribes and building roads. Carthage ruled the seas, content with their trading empire and maritime dominance. They were like two lions in different territories, each powerful in their own domain. But fate had other plans. The spark that ignited the greatest conflict of the ancient world came from an unlikely place, the island of Sicily. This strategic piece of land sat right between the Roman and Carthaginian spheres of influence, and when local conflicts drew both powers into the same small war, everything changed forever. What followed would be known as the Punic Wars, named after the Roman word for Phoenician. But these weren't just wars between two cities. This was a struggle for the soul of the Mediterranean world, a clash between two completely different ways of life that would determine the future of Western civilization. The First Punic War lasted 23 brutal years. Rome, realizing they couldn't defeat Carthage without challenging them on the sea, did something that seemed impossible. They learned to build a navy from scratch. Roman engineers captured a wrecked Carthaginian warship, took it apart piece by piece, and used it as a blueprint to construct an entire fleet. Within months, Rome had transformed from a landlocked power into a serious naval threat. But here's where the story gets really interesting. The Romans knew they were terrible sailors compared to the Carthaginians, so they came up with a typically Roman solution. They turned sea battles into land battles. They invented a device called the corvus, essentially a bridge with spikes that could slam down onto enemy ships, allowing Roman soldiers to board and fight hand-to-hand combat on deck. After decades of fighting, Rome won that first war, but the victory came at an enormous cost. Both civilizations were exhausted, their treasuries drained, their populations devastated. Most people assumed this would be the end of the conflict. They were wrong. 23 years later, the Second Punic War began, and this time Carthage was ready with a secret weapon, a young general named Hannibal Barca. If you've ever wondered what genius looks like in military form, Hannibal was it. He possessed a mind that could see possibilities where others saw only obstacles, and he was about to attempt something that seemed completely insane. Hannibal's plan was breathtakingly audacious. Instead of fighting Rome where they expected it, on the seas or in traditional battlefields, he would march an army from Spain, across the Pyrenees Mountains, through hostile Gallic territory, and over the Alps themselves to attack Rome from the north. And just to make it even more impossible, he would bring war elephants with him. The journey itself reads like an epic adventure story. Hannibal started with 90,000 men, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 elephants. They faced mountain tribes who rolled boulders down on them, treacherous paths where one wrong step meant death, and weather so harsh that soldiers froze to death in their sleep. When they finally emerged from the Alpine passes, Hannibal had lost more than half his army. But what remained was something extraordinary, a force of hardened veterans who had achieved the impossible and were now deep in Roman territory, ready to fight with the confidence of men who had already conquered the unconquerable. What happened next was a masterclass in military strategy. At the Battle of Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and most famously at Cannae, Hannibal didn't just defeat Roman armies, he destroyed them so completely that some modern military academies still study his tactics today. At Cannae alone, he killed or captured roughly 70,000 Roman soldiers in a single day, using a double envelopment maneuver so perfect it's still considered one of the greatest tactical achievements in military history. For a moment, it seemed like Carthage might actually win. Italian cities began defecting to Hannibal's side. Rome's allies wavered. The Senate discussed terms of surrender. Hannibal stood at the gates of Rome itself, and the entire Mediterranean world held its breath. But here's where the story takes a fascinating turn. Hannibal's greatest strength became his greatest weakness. He was so far from home, so cut off from Carthaginian support, that he couldn't finish what he had started. Meanwhile, Rome did something that revealed the true nature of their character. They refused to give up. Instead of surrendering, Rome adopted a strategy of patient endurance. They avoided direct battles with Hannibal while systematically attacking Carthaginian territories in Spain and Africa. They turned the war into a contest of resources and willpower, betting that their deeper population reserves and more unified political system would eventually triumph. The turning point came when a young Roman general named Scipio took the war directly to Africa, threatening Carthage itself. Hannibal was recalled from Italy to defend his homeland, and at the Battle of Zama, the greatest general of the ancient world finally met his match. Even then, the war might have ended differently, but for one crucial factor: Rome had learned Carthage's own secrets and turned them against their creators. Roman cavalry, trained by former Carthaginian allies, outmaneuvered Hannibal's forces. Roman strategy, adapted from Carthaginian maritime thinking, proved more flexible than Carthage's traditional methods. The Second Punic War ended in 101 before Christ, but this time the peace terms were devastating. Carthage had to pay enormous tribute, give up most of their territories, and reduce their navy to just 10 ships. They were forbidden from waging war without Roman permission. The Maritime Empire that had once ruled the Mediterranean was reduced to a single city, wealthy but powerless. You might think that would be the end of the story, but Rome's fear of Carthage ran deeper than rational calculation. For 50 years, Carthage tried to rebuild as a peaceful trading city, paying their tribute faithfully and causing no trouble. But in Rome, an old senator named Cato ended every speech with the same phrase: Carthage must be destroyed. In 149 before Christ, Rome found an excuse for a third war. This time, there would be no mercy, no terms, no survival. The siege of Carthage lasted 3 years and became one of the most horrific conflicts of the ancient world. When the city finally fell, Roman soldiers went house by house, street by street, systematically destroying everything they found. The fate of Carthage after this final defeat has become legendary, though the truth is both simpler and more terrible than the legend. For generations, people believed that Romans salted the earth where Carthage had stood, making it impossible for anything to grow there again. This dramatic story captures the emotional truth of what happened, but the historical reality was different. Rome didn't need salt to destroy Carthage. They had something more effective: time and deliberate erasure. The city was burned so thoroughly that the fires raged for days. The surviving population, roughly 50,000 people, were sold into slavery and scattered across the Roman world. The buildings were torn down stone by stone, and the harbor that had once sheltered the greatest fleet in the Mediterranean was filled with rubble. But perhaps most significantly, Rome tried to erase Carthage from memory itself. They forbade anyone from rebuilding on the site. They destroyed Carthaginian records and literature, and they encouraged historians to tell only the Roman version of events. For centuries, it seemed like they had succeeded. Carthage became a ghost, remembered only in Roman accounts that portrayed them as cruel enemies deserving their fate. Yet here's the remarkable thing about human curiosity and the persistence of truth. You can't truly erase a civilization that was once so great. In the 19th and 20th centuries, archaeologists began digging in the ruins of ancient Carthage. Slowly, carefully, they began to uncover the real story. What they found challenged everything people thought they knew. Instead of the barbaric enemy described in Roman sources, they discovered evidence of a sophisticated, cultured civilization. Beautiful art, advanced engineering, complex trade networks, and yes, even libraries full of knowledge that Rome had tried to destroy forever. These archaeological discoveries revealed that Carthage had been far more than just Rome's enemy. They had been innovators, explorers, and builders who had contributed enormously to Mediterranean civilization. Their maritime knowledge had connected distant cultures, their trade networks had spread ideas and technologies across continents, and their cities had been centers of learning and culture. The tragedy of the Punic Wars wasn't just that one civilization defeated another. It was that the Mediterranean world lost something irreplaceable when Carthage fell. We lost the balance between land and sea power, between Roman discipline and Carthaginian innovation, between conquest and commerce, as paths to greatness. Today, when we walk through the ruins of ancient Carthage in modern Tunisia, we can see traces of both civilizations. Roman columns stand next to Carthaginian foundations. Modern archaeologists work carefully to separate the layers of history, trying to understand both the destroyers and the destroyed. The story of Rome versus Carthage reminds us that history is written by the winners, but it's not owned by them. Truth has a way of surfacing, even after centuries of burial. And sometimes, in understanding what we've lost, we gain insights that are more valuable than what we've preserved. Standing today among the scattered stones where Carthage once rose from the Mediterranean shores, you might think you're looking at nothing more than ancient ruins. But if you know how to listen, these weathered remnants still whisper stories that change the world forever. Carthage was never just a city built of stone and timber. It was something far more powerful and enduring. It was an idea that refused to die. Think about what Carthage really represented. Here was a civilization that proved you didn't need to conquer the world through brute force to achieve greatness. Instead of marching armies across continents, they sent ships across oceans. Rather than building walls to keep others out, they built networks to bring everyone together. The Carthaginians understood something that many empires never grasped. True power comes not from what you can destroy, but from what you can connect. This philosophy shaped everything they touched. When Carthaginian merchants arrived in a new port, they didn't come as invaders demanding tribute. They came as partners offering mutual prosperity. They brought goods that local people had never seen, knowledge from distant lands, and opportunities for trade that could transform entire communities. In return, they gained not just wealth, but loyalty and cooperation that lasted for generations. The genius of this approach becomes clear when you consider how long Carthage lasted. While military empires rose and fell within a few centuries, Carthage thrived for over 600 years. They survived political upheavals, economic crises, and military defeats, that would have destroyed other civilizations. Why? Because they had built something more resilient than armies or fortresses. They had created relationships. Even today, 2,000 years after Rome tried to erase Carthage from history, we can see their influence everywhere. Every time a cargo ship crosses an ocean carrying goods from one continent to another, it follows principles that Carthaginian merchants pioneered. Our modern understanding of international trade, maritime law, and even diplomatic relations can be traced back to innovations that first appeared in Carthaginian harbors. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Carthage's legacy lies in something much more subtle: the way they thought about the world itself. While other ancient civilizations saw the Mediterranean as a barrier that separated peoples, Carthaginians saw it as a highway that connected them. This shift in perspective was revolutionary, and it's one that still shapes how we think about globalization and international cooperation today. Consider the word Punic itself, which comes from the Roman term for Carthaginian. Over time, it came to mean clever, strategic, or cunningly intelligent. Even Rome's attempts to vilify their greatest enemy accidentally preserved recognition of Carthaginian brilliance. When someone today describes a particularly clever strategy as Punic, they're unknowingly honoring the intellectual legacy of a civilization that Rome tried to destroy. The archaeological discoveries of the past 2 centuries have revealed just how much we lost when Carthage fell. In the ruins of Carthaginian libraries, scholars have found evidence of scientific knowledge that wouldn't be rediscovered in Europe until the Renaissance. Their understanding of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering was centuries ahead of most contemporary civilizations. Carthaginian shipbuilders developed hull designs so advanced that some of their techniques weren't fully understood until modern naval architects studied the archaeological remains. Their harbors incorporated engineering solutions for problems that modern ports still struggle with today. They created the world's first truly international currency system, developed sophisticated banking practices, and established trade laws that influenced Mediterranean commerce for centuries after their defeat. But what if history had gone differently? What if Hannibal had managed to capture Rome? What if Carthage had won the Punic Wars and become the dominant power in the ancient world? This isn't just an idle thought experiment. It's a window into understanding how profoundly different our world might have been. A Carthaginian victory would likely have meant a very different kind of empire. Instead of the rigid, militaristic system that Rome imposed, we might have seen a more flexible, commercially oriented civilization. The emphasis on trade and cooperation rather than conquest and submission could have led to earlier technological advancement, more cultural exchange, and perhaps even a more peaceful approach to dealing with different peoples and religions. The spread of Christianity, for instance, might have happened very differently under Carthaginian influence. Instead of becoming the official religion imposed by imperial decree, it might have spread more gradually through commercial networks, adapting and blending with local traditions in ways that could have prevented some of the religious conflicts that scarred later centuries. Scientific knowledge might have advanced more rapidly in a world where Carthaginian values of practical innovation and international exchange dominated. The Dark Ages that followed Rome's fall might never have happened if Carthaginian libraries and learning centers had survived to preserve ancient knowledge. Even our modern political systems bear the marks of Rome's victory over Carthage. The Western world inherited Roman concepts of rigid hierarchy, military discipline, and centralized authority. But Carthaginian political traditions emphasized negotiation, commercial partnership, and flexible alliances. A world shaped by these values might have developed very different approaches to democracy, international relations, and economic cooperation. Yet perhaps the most important lesson from Carthage's story isn't about alternative histories, but about the nature of human achievement itself. Carthage reminds us that there are many different ways to build a great civilization. Military might is just one path to power, and often not the most lasting one. The Carthaginians proved that intelligence, adaptability, and the ability to bring out the best in others can be just as powerful as any army. They showed that wealth created through cooperation lasts longer than wealth seized through conquest. They demonstrated that treating other peoples as partners rather than subjects creates stronger and more enduring relationships. These lessons feel remarkably relevant in our modern world, where global challenges require international cooperation, where economic networks span continents, and where the most successful nations are often those that excel at building bridges rather than walls. The phoenix of ancient mythology was a bird that died in flames only to rise again from its own ashes, more beautiful and powerful than before. Carthage suffered the flames of Roman conquest, but its ideas have risen again in the global civilization we're building today. Every international treaty, every trade agreement, every peaceful resolution of conflict between nations carries a trace of the Carthaginian understanding that cooperation creates more lasting power than domination. In the end, Rome may have won the Punic Wars, but Carthage won something more important: immortality through influence. Their ideas didn't die with their city. They lived on, evolved, and eventually helped shape the very world we inhabit today. The next time you see a ship from another continent unloading cargo at a distant port, or read about nations working together to solve global problems, remember Carthage. Remember that some victories are measured not in battles won, but in how long your ideas survive to influence the world. In that measure, the Phoenix of Carthage may have achieved the most complete victory of all. What if Carthage had won? Would our world look different today? What lessons can we draw from this ancient tradition? Tell us in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Legacy of Empires for more untold stories of the ancient world.